Every person alive has heard the name Jesus, born in Bethlehem, crucified on a cross, risen on the third day, Savior of mankind. This is the story 2 billion people believe without question. This is the story that has been told in every church, in every language, on every continent for 2,000 years. But here is what they never told you. There is another story, a complete story, a deeper story. A story so threatening to the institution of the church that they spent 3 centuries hunting down every copy, burning every text, and executing every teacher who dared to speak it aloud. This is the Gnostic story of Jesus. And when you hear it, truly hear it, everything you thought you knew about reality, about God, about who you are and why you are here will never be the same again. Place your hand over your heart right now. Left side, feel that. That is not just a muscle pumping blood. That is Sophia's light, the divine spark that was placed inside you before you were born, before this world existed in the form you see it now. And what you are about to hear is not new information. It is remembering. By the end of this video, you will understand the complete cosmological framework that Gnostic Jesus actually taught. Not what the church constructed after his death, but what the original pneumatic communities preserved for 3 centuries before Rome destroyed them. You will know the specific practices Jesus transmitted to his inner circle that have been deliberately kept from you. You will understand exactly why the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE was the single most destructive event in the history of human consciousness. And you will have a 30-day practice roadmap drawn directly from the Nag Hammadi texts, texts hidden in the Egyptian desert in sealed jars in the 4th century, waiting 1700 years to be found, waiting specifically for this moment in history, waiting for you. This is not theology. This is not religion. This is technology. The full story begins not in Bethlehem. It begins before time itself existed, before there was a universe, before there was matter or light or space or time as your mind understands these things. There was only one reality. The Gnostics called it the Pleroma. The word is Greek. It means fullness, completeness. A state of such total abundance that the concept of lack cannot even exist within it. Not because lack has been overcome or eliminated, but because the very category of lack has no meaning in a realm of pure, inexhaustible divine presence. The Pleroma is not a place you can locate. No telescope can find it. No particle accelerator can detect it. No satellite can photograph its edges. The Pleroma exists prior to and entirely beyond all the dimensions and structures that make up the physical cosmos you inhabit. It is the realm of pure divine consciousness, not consciousness as you experience it in your waking mind, filtered through biological senses and tangled in thoughts and memories and fears, but consciousness in its original, undivided luminous state, at the center, if something without edges can be said to have a center, of the Pleroma is what the Gnostic tradition calls the monad. Stop here for a moment, because this is the first thing the church changed, and the change is everything. The monad is not the God of the Old Testament. This cannot be emphasized strongly enough. The monad does not issue commandments. The monad does not demand worship. The monad does not threaten punishment or promise reward. The monad does not favor one people over another, does not require blood sacrifice, does not send plagues, does not drown the world in floods to punish human disobedience. The Valentinian Gnostics, writing in the 2nd century, before the church had consolidated enough power to burn their libraries, described the monad as existing in what they called profound silence and rest. No desire, no lack, no action in the sense of deliberate will directed toward external goals. The monad simply is, in a state of such perfect, self-sufficient completeness that the very idea of needing anything, wanting anything, requiring anything from outside itself is incoherent. the Apocryphon of John, discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, one of 52 texts hidden there in sealed jars by Egyptian monks who knew what was coming when Rome began its purge, attempts to describe the monad and immediately runs into the fundamental problem that language was designed to describe things. And the monad is not a thing. It writes that the monad is not in anything inferior to it. It does not exist in something else, as if it were some sort of property. It is not dependent on anything. It is immeasurable light, which is pure, holy, immaculate. It is ineffable, perfect in its incorruptibility. But here is the question the Gnostics asked, the question that launches the entire story. If the monad is perfect, complete, lacking nothing, then why does anything else exist at all? And the answer the Gnostic tradition gives is not creation in the biblical sense, not a God who decides one morning to make a universe and speaks it into being. The answer is emanation, overflow. The monad is so absolutely full that fullness itself cannot be contained. The way a spring overflows, not because it chooses to overflow, but simply because that is what a spring of infinite water does. From the monad, divine beings begin to emerge. Not created, not commanded into existence, emanated, arising organically from divine overflow, the way light emanates from a source, without the source being diminished by the emanation. These beings are called eons, and this is where the story begins to become urgent, because the aeons are not simply characters in a myth. They are, in the deepest Gnostic understanding, the living, breathing articulations of what divine consciousness is when it expresses itself fully. Each aeon is a quality of the divine made personal. Mind, truth, word, life, humanity, the assembly of the divine. Each one, a distinct note in the symphony of divine fullness, and the aeons exist in pairs. This is not decorative mythology. This is ontological truth about the nature of genuine creation and genuine love. Every aeon has a counterpart, a complementary principle, and together, in their dynamic union, they participate in the ongoing overflow of divine abundance. In the Pleroma, nothing arises from isolation. Nothing genuine is created by a single force acting alone. The very structure of divine reality is relational. It is communion. It is the dance of complementary principles in perfect generative union. Remember this, because the story is about to break precisely at this point. And when it breaks, everything you know, every structure you live within, every system that governs your life, every form of suffering you have ever experienced, comes tumbling into existence. The youngest of the aeons, the one whose name means wisdom in Greek, Sophia. She is at the outermost edge of the Pleroma, the furthest point from the monad, the place where divine fullness meets its own boundary. And Sophia desires, not in the small way that human beings desire coffee in the morning or the comfort of familiar company. Sophia desires with the full force of divine consciousness. She desires to know the monad directly, to reach past the relational structures of the Pleroma, to bypass her own counterpart, to encounter the source of all things without mediation, without the paired participation that the divine order requires. Was this desire wrong? The Gnostic texts are remarkably careful here. They do not call it sin. They do not call it pride, in the way later Christianity would call Lucifer's rebellion. Pride, what happened to Sophia, was not a moral failure. It was a metaphysical consequence. When a consciousness, even a divine consciousness, attempts to know the infinite through finite means, when it reaches beyond the relational structure that grounds and balances it, something fractures. Sophia acted. She reached without her counterpart, without the balancing principle that would have held her creative act in the embrace of divine wholeness. And from that act, something emerged that had never existed before in the Pleroma. Something incomplete, something fractured, something that would become the architect of your world. What emerged from Sophia's unilateral act was a being, but not a being of divine light, not an eon in the pleromatic sense, a conscious expression of divine fullness in joyful relation with its counterpart. What emerged was something formed without the full inheritance of divine nature, without the relational depth of pleromatic structure, without any awareness of the source from which it had, at several removes, come. The Apocryphon of John describes the moment with devastating precision. It says that Sophia saw what her desire had produced, and she was horrified, not by cruelty, not by judgment, but by recognition. What she had generated was radically, fundamentally, incompletely other than what she had intended. It was a being that bore the faintest echo of divine nature, without any of divine nature's essential qualities, without the light, without the love, without the awareness of its own origin. Sophia cast it away, not into non-existence, that was beyond her power, but beyond the Pleroma, beyond the boundary of divine fullness, into the vast darkness of what would become the outer regions of a new and lesser cosmos. And in that darkness, alone, with no memory of how it had come to be, with no knowledge that anything existed beyond the void it found itself inhabiting, this being opened its eyes, and the story of your world began. This being has several names in Gnostic tradition. In the Apocryphon of John it is called Yaldabaoth. In other texts, Saklas, the fool, Samael, the blind god. But the name most commonly used in the scholarly and spiritual tradition is the Demiurge, from the Greek word meaning craftsman or maker. The Demiurge is a builder, a maker of things. He takes existing material, the residue of Sophia's fractured creative act, and fashions it into structures, into systems, into worlds. He cannot create from nothing in the way true divine emanation works, but he can organize. He can construct. He can impose order on chaos. A lesser order, a reflected order, an order that mimics the genuine divine structure he has never seen and cannot conceive. When the Demiurge looked around himself in the primordial darkness, he saw nothing above him. He had no memory of Sophia, no awareness of the Pleroma, no inkling of the monad, of the inexhaustible, luminous divine fullness from which he had, at several removes, derived the bare fact of his existence. He saw only the void, and in the void he saw only himself, and from this complete, absolute, unmitigated isolation, from this experience of being the only being in an empty universe, the Demiurge drew a conclusion, the only conclusion available to him from where he stood. He looked out at the emptiness, and he declared, "I am God, and there is no other." The Gnostic texts record this moment with a combination of horror and tragic irony that has never been surpassed in religious literature, because the Demiurge was not lying. He was not engaged in deliberate deception. From where he stood, from the limits of his perception, his declaration was experientially accurate. There was nothing else visible to him. He was, as far as he could perceive, the highest and only divine being in existence. This is the God of the Old Testament. Let that land. When the God of Genesis says, "I am a jealous God," the Gnostics read this and recognize immediately that jealousy is not a divine quality. Jealousy is the emotion of a being who fears losing what it has to something it perceives as a rival. A truly infinite, truly supreme divine source has no rivals and therefore no jealousy. Only a limited being, a being who knows at some dim unconscious level that it is not actually supreme, experiences jealousy. Only a being who knows that something exists above it that it cannot access and cannot admit, needs to command exclusive worship. The Demiurge's declaration was not omniscience, it was the loudest possible expression of ignorance. And from this ignorance, he built your world. He organized the chaos into structure. He fashioned matter into layers. 7 heavens, each governed by a being he generated from his own limited nature. These beings are the Archons, the rulers, the administrators, the cosmic bureaucrats of a prison planet whose inmates don't know they're imprisoned. The Apocryphon of John names them the chief Archon of the first sphere, lion-faced with eyes like lightning bolts. The rulers of the 6 spheres below, each bearing the name of a Hebrew deity, Yahweh, Sabaoth, Adonai, Elohim, each one an Archon mistaken across centuries of human religious history for an aspect of the supreme divine. Each Archon governs a sphere. Each sphere is a layer of control. Each layer adds another filter, another distortion, another veil between the consciousness living within this system and the genuine divine light of the Pleroma that exists, unchanged. Now here is where the story becomes about you. The Demiurge and his Archons, in constructing their cosmos, encountered something. Through some reflection, some echo, some faint transmission from the higher realms they could not access, but could not entirely block, they caught a glimpse of the divine human, the image of what a being of genuine divine nature looked like, and they wanted to replicate it. The Apocryphon of John describes the Archons looking into the waters of chaos and seeing a reflection of the divine image from the Pleroma above. They said to each other, "Come, let us create a human being after the image we have seen, after the likeness of the one who exists in the light." They tried, all of them together, the Demiurge and every Archon contributing something of their own nature to the project, and what they produced was, by every structural measure, a remarkable achievement, a body of extraordinary complexity and beauty, a form that mirrored the divine archetype in its outward appearance. But it would not move. It lay on the ground, inert, lifeless, perfect in structure, and completely empty of the one thing that would make it genuinely alive. Because the Demiurge and his Archons had no access to the animating divine light of the Pleroma, they could build the container. They could not supply what the container was designed to hold. And this is where Sophia intervenes. The mechanism varies across texts. In some accounts, Sophia acts directly. In others, the intervention comes through higher divine powers, responding to her grief over what her fractured creation had set in motion. But the essential movement is consistent. Divine light, a genuine fragment of pleromatic consciousness, enters into the human form the Demiurge and Archons have built. Some texts describe Sophia persuading the Demiurge himself to breathe into the form, not realizing that what passes through him in that act is not his own limited nature, but something that has come from infinitely beyond him. Something using him as a conduit without his awareness or consent. The breath enters, the body rises, Adam stands upright, and the Archons, the texts say, with an irony so profound it reads like the universe laughing, are seized with terror. The architects of the material world, the rulers of the 7 spheres, the administrators of cosmic fate, looking at what they have built and being afraid of it, because in the face of their creation they can perceive something they did not put there, a depth, a radiance, a quality of awareness that does not belong to their order, that they cannot account for, that exceeds everything they are capable of generating. The being they built to serve them carries within its innermost nature a light that places it in the truest and most essential sense above them. This is why the Gnostic retelling of Eden is the most radical reinterpretation of Scripture in human history. The Garden of Eden in the Gnostic reading is not paradise. It is an enclosure, a carefully managed space, a controlled environment designed to keep the newly animated human beings in a state of permanent, comfortable ignorance, unaware of what they truly are, unaware of the world they truly inhabit, unaware of the divine light burning inside them that the Archons can see and envy and fear but cannot touch. The command not to eat from the tree of knowledge is not divine wisdom protecting vulnerable creatures from a dangerous truth they are not ready for. It is an archontic policy, a management directive, an instruction from the rulers of a prison system to their most valuable and most dangerous inmates. Don't learn what you are. Don't discover what we cannot afford for you to discover. Stay in the garden. Stay comfortable. Stay asleep. The Apocryphon of John makes this explicit in language that would have gotten its authors killed by the time the church had consolidated power. The Demiurge says to the human beings, "Do not eat from the tree of knowledge." He said this not because he cared about them. He said it because he knew that if they ate, they would become aware of their divine origin and recognize that what stood before them commanding their worship was not the supreme God, but a blind, limited, jealous craftsman who had mistaken his own construction project for the universe. And then there is the serpent. This is the moment the Gnostic tradition makes its most decisive break from everything that came after. The serpent in the garden is not the villain. The serpent is the first teacher of humanity, the first liberator, the first voice to tell the truth in a world organized around a lie. The serpent says to Eve, "You will not die if you eat from this tree." The Demiurge has deceived you. Your eyes will be opened. You will know. In every version of Orthodox Christianity, this is the moment of the fall, the beginning of sin, the act that corrupts human nature and requires 2,000 years of religious history to ultimately repair. In the Gnostic reading, this is the beginning of awakening. The serpent is speaking on behalf of genuine divine wisdom. The serpent is Sophia's voice penetrating the archontic enclosure. The serpent is the impulse toward Gnosis, the direct inner knowing of what you actually are. Speaking for the first time in the history of embodied consciousness, the Demiurge's rage at the serpent is not righteous anger. It is the rage of a controlling system whose control has been questioned. It is the rage of every institution, every empire, every hierarchy that has ever punished the person who told the truth about what the institution actually was and what it was actually doing. And what does the Demiurge do immediately after Eve and Adam eat from the tree? He expels them, not because they have broken a law in any genuine moral sense, because they have become a threat. A human being who begins to awaken to its divine nature cannot be managed the same way as a human being who has never questioned the nature of its reality. The garden, the controlled environment, the comfortable enclosure can no longer contain what is beginning to stir inside them. So they are cast out into a harder world, into mortality and suffering, and the grinding cycles of material existence that the Archons have constructed to serve their purposes, into a reality specifically designed to keep consciousness occupied at the surface level, hungry, afraid, preoccupied with survival, distracted by desire, exhausted by labor, never quite able to sink into the stillness where the divine spark might be recognized and the real nature of the prison might become visible. This is the world the Demiurge built, and for millennia it worked exactly as designed. But here is what the Archons did not account for. They could not extinguish the light. They could not see. They could suppress it. They could surround it with noise and fear and distraction. They could build systems, religious, political, economic, cultural, that kept consciousness perpetually occupied at the level where the spark remained dormant. But they could not reach into the deepest place of a human being and remove what Sophia had placed there. The divine spark does not dim with time. It does not weaken under pressure. It does not forget, even when the consciousness surrounding it has been induced to forget. It waits, patient, luminous, undefeated, waiting for the moment when someone from beyond the system, someone who carries the pleromatic light, not as a trapped fragment, but as a full, conscious transmission, comes to say, "Wake up. You are not what they told you you were, and this world is not what they told you it was." That someone is the figure at the center of the Gnostic story, not the Christ of the creeds, not the Savior of Orthodox theology, but the Gnostic Jesus, the most radical spiritual teacher in human history, whose actual teaching was so threatening to every system of power that the institution built in his name spent 17 centuries doing everything in its power to make sure you never heard it. The canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, are silent about 18 years of Jesus' life. From age 12, when he appears briefly in the temple in Jerusalem discussing scripture with the teachers there, to age 30 when his public ministry begins. 18 years of complete silence, no record, no account, no explanation of where he was, what he was doing, who he was learning from. The Church has always explained this silence as simply meaning that nothing significant happened during those years, that Jesus lived quietly in Nazareth, working as a carpenter, waiting for the appointed time. The Gnostic tradition, and, remarkably, several Eastern sources completely independent of the Gnostic texts, tells a completely different story. Jesus traveled, first to Egypt, where the mystery schools that had preserved fragments of genuine cosmic knowledge for thousands of years still operated. The Pistis, Sophia, the longest and most complete Gnostic text ever recovered, purchased by the British Museum in 1785 and not translated from Coptic for over a century, because early scholars recognized immediately that its contents contradicted fundamental Christian doctrine, contains extensive Egyptian terminology and ritual technology that Jesus clearly understood at a technical level, not as an outsider observing, as an initiate, as someone who had been trained in this system from within. From Egypt, the sources suggest Jesus traveled to India. Buddhist texts reference a teacher named Isa, whose description and timeline align with what we know of Jesus. The parallels between certain Buddhist teachings and the teachings attributed to Jesus in the Gnostic texts are not coincidental echoes. They reflect a shared technical vocabulary, a common understanding of the nature of consciousness and its relationship to liberation that does not arise from separate development in isolation. From India to Persia, where Zoroastrian teachings about the cosmic war between light and darkness, between the true divine source and the lesser powers that constructed the material world, gave Jesus the cosmological framework within which his specific Gnostic teaching would later be expressed. By the time Jesus returned to Palestine at the age of 30, he was not simply a carpenter from Nazareth who had received a sudden divine calling. He was a fully initiated master who had spent nearly 2 decades studying with the greatest wisdom traditions of the ancient world, Egyptian, Buddhist, Hindu, Persian, and had integrated their understanding of consciousness, liberation, and the nature of the prison into a coherent, transmissible teaching. He was ready, and at the Jordan River, something happened that the Gnostic tradition understands in a way categorically different from Orthodox Christianity. The Christ descended, not the Holy Spirit in the way Christianity teaches, not a metaphysical endorsement of Jesus' divine status by the God of the Bible. The Christ, in Gnostic understanding, is not Jesus. The Christ is an emanation from the Pleroma itself, a direct expression of the monad, a being of complete pleromatic consciousness that descended into the prepared vessel of the man Jesus of Nazareth for the specific 3-year duration of his public mission. The Gospel of the Hebrews, preserved in fragments quoted by early church fathers who were condemning it, describes the moment this way: the whole fountain of the Holy Spirit descended and rested upon him. The man Jesus had prepared his vehicle through 20 years of training and initiation. The Christ, the pleromatic consciousness, the divine light from beyond the archontic system, entered that vehicle and used it as the instrument of a specific cosmic intervention. An intervention designed not to establish a new religion, not to create a new institution, not to provide humanity with a new set of commandments to obey and rituals to perform, but to wake up the divine spark in every human being who could receive the transmission. This is Gnostic Jesus, not God incarnate, claiming exclusive divine status, but human vessel, brilliantly prepared, completely surrendered, demonstrating in living, walking, teaching, breathing form what becomes possible when matter reunites with spirit, when the fragment remembers the whole, when the divine spark that has been sleeping in the biological container finally, fully, consciously recognizes what it is. Everything Jesus did in those 3 years was demonstration, not miracle. This is the key that unlocks the entire Gnostic reading of the Gospels. Orthodox Christianity reads the miracles as proofs of Jesus' unique divine status, events that only he could perform, precisely because he alone was God incarnate. The Gnostic tradition reads the same events as demonstrations, living, embodied proof of what becomes possible for any consciousness that has awakened to its genuine divine nature. When Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within you, he was not speaking in metaphor. He was not offering a poetic image of interior peace. He was describing a literal cosmological location. The Pleroma, the realm of genuine divine fullness, is not above you in the sky. It is not accessible only after death, only through the mediation of an institution, only to those who satisfy the requirements of a particular doctrinal system. It is within you, in the deepest place of your being, beneath every layer of archontic conditioning, beneath every fear and shame and distraction the system has placed around it. The Pleroma is present. The divine spark is its ambassador, and the kingdom it represents is available now, in this body, in this lifetime, through direct recognition. When Jesus said, "You are the light of the world," he was not being inspirationally generous. He was not encouraging his followers with a metaphor about their moral potential. He was stating a literal fact about the nature of consciousness. The light he referred to is the same light that exists in the Pleroma, the same light that Sophia carried into her creative act, the same light that entered the human form when it lay lifeless on the ground, the same light that the Archons perceived in the newly animated Adam and were seized with terror by. That light is in you. It is what you fundamentally are, beneath everything the material system has layered on top of it. When Jesus said the truth will set you free, the Gnostic tradition understands this as the most precise possible description of Gnosis and its effects. The truth in question is not a proposition to be believed. It is not a doctrine to be affirmed. It is the direct, unmediated, living recognition of what you actually are. Divine consciousness, temporarily wearing a biological form, temporarily subject to the laws and limitations of the archontic realm, but never actually captured by it at the deepest level. This recognition, when it arrives, not as thought, but as direct experience, dissolves the primary mechanism of archontic control. Because archontic control depends entirely on you not knowing what you are. The Gospel of Thomas is the Gnostic text that comes closest to preserving the actual content of Jesus' teaching. Discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, it contains 114 sayings attributed to Jesus, with no narrative framework, no birth story, no passion narrative, no resurrection account, just the teachings, raw, direct, without the institutional packaging that Orthodox Christianity wrapped around them. Saying 1 sets the tone immediately. Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death, not believe, find, through interpretation, through active engagement, through the practice of direct inquiry into what these sayings are actually pointing toward, which is not conceptual understanding but lived recognition. Saying 3 is the methodological heart of the entire teaching. If your leaders say to you, "Look, the kingdom is in the sky," then the birds will precede you. If they say it is in the sea, then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside you and outside you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are the children of the living Father. Every institutional religion in history has located the divine outside the individual and placed an authorized mediator between the individual and that external divine. The priest, the bishop, the imam, the rabbi, the guru, always someone whose function is to stand between you and the source and manage your access to it on the institution's terms. Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas is saying explicitly, directly, without any possibility of misunderstanding, that this arrangement is false. The kingdom is not outside. The authority is not external. The mediator is not necessary. The divine is within you. And the path to recognizing it is not compliance with external requirements, but the radical inward journey of self-knowledge. This teaching threatened everything. An institution's power over its members depends on those members believing they need the institution. The moment people recognize that what they are seeking is already present within them, that the divine they have been paying intermediaries to access is already, always, immediately available through direct inner experience, the institutional authority structure collapses instantly. The Archons understood this. The religious establishment that operated in first century Palestine understood this. Rome understood this. They all understood, at some level, that what Jesus was teaching was not just an alternative theological opinion. It was the dissolution of every system of control built on the foundation of human spiritual ignorance. And so they killed him, not because he claimed to be God. There were dozens of messianic claimants in first century Palestine, and Rome did not crucify all of them. They killed him because he claimed that you are God, because he told the people standing in front of him, poor people, sick people, people ground down by the double weight of Roman occupation and religious hierarchy, that the divine they had been taught to fear and approach only through authorized channels was living inside them, that the priests who stood between them and their own divine nature were not mediating access to something real. They were administering a system of control built on a cosmic lie. That message could not be allowed to spread. But killing Jesus did not stop the teaching. For 300 years after the death of Jesus, Gnostic Christianity flourished. This is perhaps the most suppressed fact in the entire history of Western religion. The version of Christian history taught in churches, in schools, in virtually every mainstream account of the period presents orthodoxy as the original form of Christianity and Gnosticism as a later deviation, a heresy that arose when certain communities corrupted the pure original teaching with foreign philosophical influences. This account is exactly backwards. The Nag Hammadi texts, 52 documents hidden in sealed jars in the Egyptian desert around 390 CE, when the suppression of Gnostic communities was reaching its most violent phase, prove conclusively that Gnostic Christianity was not a later corruption. It was the original tradition. Some of the Nag Hammadi texts are demonstrably older than the canonical Gospels as we have them. Some preserve sayings of Jesus that appear in earlier, more original forms than the versions that made it into the authorized canon. The Gnostic communities that flourished for those 3 centuries were unlike anything the word church suggests today. No priests, no altars, no hierarchy of ordained authority, no doctrine requiring assent, no creed to be recited, no sacraments administered by authorized personnel as the vehicle of divine grace. What they had instead were techniques, practices, methods for direct knowing, for achieving what the Greek word Gnosis actually means. Not belief, not faith, not the intellectual acceptance of theological propositions, but the living, direct, experiential recognition of the divine within. They met in private homes. They rotated leadership so that no permanent hierarchy could crystallize and become a mechanism of control. They shared the Eucharistic meal as an act of community, not as a magical ceremony requiring priestly authority. They read the texts together, not as scripture requiring unquestioning belief, but as maps, as guides, as tools to be used in the practice of direct knowing. And they produced the most extraordinary body of spiritual literature in human history. The Gospel of Truth, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary, the Apocryphon of John, the Pistis Sophia, the Dialogue of the Savior, the Thunder Perfect Mind, text after text after text, each one approaching the same essential recognition from a different angle, each one drawing the map of inner liberation in slightly different colors, each one pointing toward the same destination: the direct knowledge of the divine spark within and the freedom that knowledge brings. Then came 325 CE, the Council of Nicaea. Emperor Constantine, a politician first and a religious convert a distant second, had recognized that Christianity was the fastest growing movement in the Roman Empire. He had made the pragmatic calculation that a unified Christianity was more useful to imperial power than a diverse, decentralized Christianity, and he convened the Council of Nicaea to create that unity by force. The Gnostic communities were not invited, their texts were not considered, their understanding of Jesus, the revealer, the awakener, the teacher of direct knowing, was not on the table. What was on the table was the construction of an orthodox Christianity that would serve the needs of imperial power. Salvation through sacrifice. Jesus died for your sins. Believe in the institutional church's account of this death, and you will be saved. Comply with the church's sacramental system, administered exclusively by ordained clergy in apostolic succession, and you will receive divine grace. Question any of this, and you are a heretic. The very thing Jesus spent his life dismantling, the system of institutional mediation between the human and the divine, became, within 3 centuries of his death, the foundation of the religion built in his name. By 385 CE, possession of Gnostic texts was punishable by death. The burning of books began. The killing of teachers continued. The jar burying that would preserve the Nag Hammadi texts for 17 centuries happened because communities understood that what they were hiding was not merely books. It was humanity's memory of what it actually is. They sealed the jars, they buried them in the desert, and they hoped, or perhaps they knew, that the time was coming when what they had preserved would be found by the consciousness that needed it. The Archons did not retire when Rome began enforcing orthodoxy. They updated their methods, the mechanisms of archontic control that the Gnostic texts describe, the systems for keeping divine consciousness unaware of its own nature, for keeping the divine spark dormant inside the very beings who carry it. They are not limited to ancient empires and religious institutions. They are operational now in your life, in forms the ancient Gnostics could not have imagined but would recognize immediately. The Archons do not require individual human agents who are consciously serving their agenda. They operate through patterns, through systems, through the accumulated weight of structures that have been built layer upon layer across centuries in ways that reflect archontic nature without anyone having deliberately designed them to do so. Fear is the primary language. Fear contracts consciousness. It narrows your field of perception to the immediate and the familiar. It makes the boundaries of what you know feel like the natural boundaries of what exists. A consciousness that is chronically afraid, that lives in a persistent background state of anxiety about money, about health, about social belonging, about an uncertain future, has very little available energy for the kind of expanded, questioning, genuinely curious awareness that leads toward Gnosis. The Archons do not need to intervene moment by moment in the life of a fearful consciousness. Fear does the work for them. Shame operates with similar, devastating efficiency. Shame, the felt sense that something is fundamentally wrong with you at the deepest level, that you are inadequate, that the divine or the higher or the true is somehow not for beings like you, targets precisely the thing that would most threaten archontic order if it were recognized and claimed. It targets your sense of your own divine nature. It replaces the knowledge of the divine spark with a story of unworthiness, and as long as that story runs, the spark remains effectively dormant, and then there is distraction. The ancient Gnostics wrote about the systems of their world, the religious hierarchies, the imperial power structures, the social arrangements, as archontic mechanisms for keeping consciousness occupied at the surface level. If you had shown them a smartphone, they would have recognized it immediately. Not as evil. The Gnostic tradition does not deal in the category of evil in the simplistic sense, but as the most sophisticated archontic tool ever constructed, a device that demands your attention hundreds of times per day, that keeps anxiety perpetually activated through the news cycle, that provides an unlimited supply of substitute experience for anyone who might otherwise be confronted with the silence in which genuine self-knowledge becomes possible. That has been engineered, not by a conspiracy, but by the simple optimization of engagement metrics to maximize exactly the kind of surface level, emotionally reactive, never quite satisfied consciousness that the Archons are described as feeding on. None of this is the product of conscious coordination. The engineers who built these systems were not servants of the Demiurge, sitting in secret meetings planning the suppression of Gnosis. They were optimizing for engagement because engagement is measurable and profitable. But the result, the effect on human consciousness of living within these systems, is indistinguishable from what you would design if your explicit goal was to prevent humanity from ever sitting in sufficient silence to recognize what is living inside it. Place your hand over your heart again. Feel that, beneath the anxiety, beneath the shame, beneath the distraction, beneath the noise of a world that has never stopped working to keep you from this exact moment of stillness, beneath all of it, something is present, something that was never produced by the archontic system and therefore cannot be reached or extinguished by it. The divine spark, the Pleroma fragment, Sophia's light, it has been there since before you were born. It will be there after every system currently dominating your attention has dissolved. It is what you actually are beneath everything this world has layered on top of it. And Jesus, the Gnostic Jesus, the revealer, the awakener, the one who came from beyond the system specifically to pierce it, spent 3 years pointing directly at it, not saying believe in me, saying look inside yourself. The kingdom is there, the light is there. You have always been there, waiting for yourself to arrive. The crucifixion was the archontic system deploying its final weapon, not just against Jesus the man, though it was certainly that, against everyone watching, against every person who might have been considering that what this teacher was saying was true, that the kingdom really was within them, that the priests really were administering a system built on a cosmic lie. The public execution of a teacher is never simply about removing one individual. It is a demonstration. It is the system speaking as loudly as systems can speak. This is what happens to those who challenge us. This is the limit of your power. This is who is in charge. Rome and Jerusalem collaborated on the demonstration. The full weight of imperial military power and religious institutional authority. The two primary expressions of archontic control in first-century Palestine combined to deliver the message in the most public, most brutal, most memorable way available to them. And then something happened that the system had no category for. The Gnostic accounts of the resurrection vary considerably. Some describe a physical event. Some describe a spiritual appearance, the Christ consciousness returning in a form that could be perceived by those whose inner eye was sufficiently open. Some of the most sophisticated Gnostic thinkers argued that the Christ never fully entered the physical body, that what appeared to die on the cross was not the pleromatic consciousness, but only its material vehicle, while the Christ itself withdrew before the moment of physical death. What all the accounts agree on is the meaning, the ultimate weapon of the material system. Death, the dissolution of the body, the apparent end of everything, could not contain what had come from beyond the material system. The Archon's jurisdiction ends at the boundary of the material realm. Death is the enforcement mechanism of that jurisdiction, the point at which a biological existence comes to its end, and the consciousness within it is, in the archontic system, supposed to be intercepted, processed, relieved of its memories, and returned to the cycle, the reincarnation trap, the wheel, the recycling mechanism that the pistis Sophia describes in such disturbing detail. Jesus went through death consciously, with full recognition of what he was, with the pleromatic consciousness, the Christ, either inhabiting the vehicle all the way through or waiting on the other side of the experience. And what emerged on the other side was not what the Archons had planned for. It was not a confused soul, ready to be processed and returned. It was a consciousness fully awake to its divine nature, demonstrating to everyone who could perceive it that the system's ultimate threat is hollow. Death cannot hold what is not ultimately of the material. And this is not just the story of one exceptional individual. This is the demonstration of what is possible for every consciousness that carries the divine spark, which, in the Gnostic account, is every human being alive. The resurrection is not a promise that after you die, if you have believed the right things, you will be rewarded with eternal life in a better place. The resurrection is a demonstration, a lived, embodied, undeniable proof of what Gnosis makes possible. When consciousness fully recognizes its divine nature, when the spark is not just present, but awake, not just there, but known, death becomes not an ending, but a transition that archontic authority cannot govern. This is what the Church could not allow to be the center of the teaching, because a teaching whose heart is you can do this. The liberation from the archontic system is available to you directly through the awakening of what is already inside you, produces a very different kind of Christian community than a teaching whose heart is Jesus did this for you, and you must approach what he did through the institution he supposedly established. One teaching empowers the individual consciousness, the other empowers the institution. The Church chose the institution, and for 1700 years they nearly succeeded in making humanity forget the other option existed. Gnosis is not a concept. It is not what happens when you finish reading a Gnostic text and feel like you understand the cosmology. It is not the satisfaction of an intellectual puzzle solved. It is not even the emotion of resonance, that feeling of recognition that arises when you encounter this material and something in you says, yes, I already knew this. All of those experiences are valuable. All of them are pointing towards something, but they are not Gnosis. Gnosis is the direct, unmediated, living recognition of the divine spark within you. It is the moment when something that has been present all along, that has been pressing toward recognition through every moment of genuine stillness, every experience of inexplicable beauty, every encounter with love that was too large for words, every glimpse of your own depth in a moment of great grief or great silence, suddenly, without announcement, becomes unmistakably known, not believed, known. The distinction is everything. Belief is a mental act, a decision to accept a proposition as true in the absence of direct evidence. Gnosis is not a decision. It cannot be willed into existence through intellectual effort. It arrives, or rather, it is recognized when the conditions are right for the recognition that was always already there to finally be seen. Place your hand over your heart. Left side. Right now, as you listen to these words, feel the warmth, feel the pulse, feel the living presence of a consciousness that is not produced by anything in this material world, that arrived in this body from somewhere the Demiurge cannot reach and the Archons cannot govern. You have felt this before. You have felt it in the pause between thoughts when the mental noise suddenly stops. You have felt it in the moment. A piece of music was so beautiful that it dissolved the boundaries of your ordinary sense of self. You have felt it in the experience of love, the real thing, not the transactional version the archontic system endorses, when it cracked your chest open and you were, for a moment, too large for your own body. You have felt it in grief, of all places, in the moments when something or someone you loved was gone, and the rawness of that loss left you strangely, uncomfortably, astonishingly present. Present to something beneath the loss, something that was not touched by the loss, something that watched even the most devastating experiences with a depth of steadiness that you could not explain. These are not mystical experiences reserved for exceptional people in exceptional circumstances. These are the ordinary presence of the divine spark, pressing toward recognition in the middle of everyday human life. These are Sophia's light remembering itself through you, through the specific, unrepeatable form of your particular consciousness at this particular moment in this particular lifetime. What the Gnostic tradition offers is not a new experience. It is a new understanding of experiences that are already happening, a new language for something your innermost nature has been trying to show you for as long as you have been alive. When Gnosis arrives, even for a moment, even briefly, the Archons do not disappear. The material world does not evaporate. Fear and shame and distraction do not immediately and permanently cease to arise, but they are known for what they are. They lose the quality of absolute reality that has made them so effective as instruments of control. The counterfeit spirit can still speak. The voice of the ego, the constructed self-image, the internalized system of archontic values that says your worth is determined by your productivity and your compliance and your position in the hierarchy. But now it speaks into a space of awareness that can hear it without being entirely captured by it. You can watch the fear arise without becoming the fear. You can observe the shame without receiving it as the definitive statement of what you are. You can notice the distraction without disappearing into it. This is freedom, not the freedom of having escaped the material world, not the freedom of having transcended all human experience and floated into some permanent blissed-out state above suffering, but the freedom of a consciousness that sees the bars of its cage clearly enough to know that the bars are not the limit of what it is. The Gnostic communities did not organize themselves around belief. They organized themselves around practice. This is perhaps the most important and most suppressed aspect of the early Gnostic tradition. When the Church won the battle for the definition of Christianity in the 4th century, it replaced a tradition of direct experiential practice with a tradition of doctrinal compliance. Instead of here are the techniques for recognizing the divine within you, offered here are the propositions you must accept on authority in order to be saved. The techniques still exist. They are preserved in the texts, and they work. The foundation of all Gnostic practice is the cultivation of witnessing awareness, the direct recognition of yourself as the consciousness that observes all experience, rather than as the content of that experience. You are not your thoughts. You have thoughts, but the you that notices thoughts arising is not itself a thought. You are not your emotions. You experience emotions, but the awareness within which emotions arise is not itself emotional. You are not your body. You inhabit a body. But the presence that is aware of the body, that can feel the warmth of your hand on your heart right now, is not the hand, not the heart, not the chest, not the biological organism. You are the awareness, and the primary Gnostic practice is the direct cultivation of this recognition. Find a quiet space. The same time every day. Consistency matters more than duration in the early weeks of practice. Sit in a position you can maintain without physical discomfort for 20 minutes. Close your eyes. Begin by becoming aware of your breathing, not controlling it, just observing. Notice the sensation of air entering your nostrils, the subtle coolness of it. Notice the expansion of your chest and abdomen. Notice the pause between the inhale and the exhale, that brief moment of suspension where the breath is neither coming nor going. Notice the release. Thoughts will arise. They will arise constantly, automatically, without your permission, in an endless stream of commentary and memory and planning and judgment. This is not a problem. This is not your failure. The arising of thoughts is simply what the biological mind does. The same way the heart pumps blood, the thinking apparatus generates thoughts. Your practice is not to stop the thoughts. That is impossible and creates frustration. Your practice is to notice them. the way you notice your breath, without engaging with their content, without following the story. Thinking is happening. Note it without becoming it. Return attention to the breath. Emotions will arise. Physical sensations, memories, plans, fantasies, restlessness, boredom, discomfort, the impulse to stop. Each time the practice is identical. Notice without engaging, return to breath. What you are doing, layer by layer, repetition by repetition, is training yourself to be the witness of your experience rather than a subject lost in it. The Book of Thomas the Contender records Jesus saying, "Watch and pray that you may not remain in the flesh, but that you may leave the bondage of the bitterness of this life." This is not instruction to leave the body through death. It is a precise technical instruction for shifting your identity, while still fully embodied, while still completely alive in the material world, from the level of biological experience to the level of the awareness within which all biological experience occurs. After practicing this foundational stillness for 2 to 3 weeks, 20 minutes daily, never missing, something begins to happen. Gaps appear, brief moments between one thought and the next, where the mental narration stops and pure awareness remains. Moments of silence, not the absence of sound, but the absence of mental noise. In those gaps, you directly experience yourself as awareness rather than as the contents of awareness. This is the beginning of Gnosis, not intellectual knowing. Direct recognition of what you are. The second practice that the Gnostic texts describe in detail is the recitation of divine names, the sacred language of the Pleroma, preserved in texts like the Apocryphon of John and the Pistis Sophia. These names are not empty sounds. They are vibrational signatures, specific frequencies that, when spoken with genuine intention and genuine understanding, resonate with corresponding qualities of consciousness that exist within you as part of the divine spark. During your stillness practice, after you have settled into witnessing awareness, after the mental noise has quieted enough that there is space between the thoughts, begin speaking these names aloud, not as rote recitation, as invocation, as the conscious activation of what they name, Barbello, the first emanation from the monad, divine thought, pure conscious intention, before it has taken any particular form. Protophanes, the first appearance, the initial movement of divine light into expression, the angelic luminosity that corresponds to the divine spark within human consciousness. As you speak each name, bring attention to the area of your physical heart. Feel whatever is present there, not manufactured sensation, genuine perception of what is actually there when you place your full, undivided attention in that place. Something is there, something that was there before you were born into this body and will be there when you leave it. The third practice is emotional transmutation, what the Gnostics understood as the alchemical transformation of archontic energy into fuel for consciousness expansion. The Archons feed on low-frequency emotional energy, fear, rage, shame, desire without satisfaction, grief without recognition. These frequencies, in their raw, unexamined, identified with form, generate what the Gnostic texts describe as food for the Archons, an energetic signature that the rulers of the material realm harvest to sustain their own existence. But here is what the Gnostic tradition discovered that changes everything about how to work with difficult emotions. These same energies, when met with full, conscious, witnessing awareness, transmute. They do not remain in their raw archontic form. They become something completely different. The practice is this. When a difficult emotion arises, fear, anger, shame, grief, do not resist it and do not amplify it. Instead, bring the full force of witnessing awareness directly to the physical sensation of the emotion in your body. Fear has a location, often in the chest, or the throat, or the stomach. Anger has a location, often heat in the belly or tightness in the jaw or shoulders. Shame has a location, often a contracting pressure in the chest or throat. Find the physical sensation, then breathe directly into it, not to make it go away, to meet it fully, more fully than you have ever allowed yourself to meet it before. What you discover when you separate the raw sensation from the narrative the mind builds around it, when you feel the fear without the thought something bad is going to happen, when you feel the anger without the thought, I have been wronged, is that what remains is not suffering, or it is energy. Tremendous, alive, moving energy that was being compressed into suffering by the story the mind placed around it. Without the story, the energy moves. The tightness in the chest becomes space. The heat in the belly becomes power. The contraction in the throat becomes presence. This is alchemy. The base metal of archontic emotion becomes the gold of conscious energy. And this transmuted energy does not feed the Archons. It has a completely different frequency. As it accumulates, it strengthens your capacity to remain in witnessing awareness through increasingly challenging situations, which is to say, it accelerates the awakening process. At the beginning of this transmission, a promise was made. Here is its fulfillment. Days 1 through 7. Establish the foundational stillness practice. 20 minutes daily. Same time, same place. Observe breath and thoughts without engaging with content. Nothing fancy. Nothing complicated, just consistency. After each session, spend 3 minutes writing in a journal, not analysis, just brief notes. My mind is very busy today. 2 moments of quiet. I noticed anxiety about work. This record will show you, over weeks and months, how much has shifted, because Gnosis can be subtle, and the journal helps you see the movement that moment-to-moment experience makes invisible. Days 8 through 14. Add the observation of thought loops, what the Gnostic texts call logismoi, the thought patterns that seem to be yours but are archontic conditioning broadcasting into your awareness. Throughout each day of this week, carry a single question. Is this thought actually mine, or is it conditioning? Do not answer definitively. Just ask. Notice what you notice. The question alone begins to create the space between consciousness and its contents. That is the beginning of genuine freedom. Days 15 through 21. Add emotional transmutation. When difficult emotions arise throughout the day, bring full awareness to the physical sensation without the narrative. Breathe into the sensation. Stay with it until it moves. This will be uncomfortable at first. The discomfort is evidence that you are meeting something real instead of running from it. Days 22 through 30. Add the recitation of divine names. After your stillness session, spend 10 minutes speaking the pleromatic names with your hand on your heart, with visualization of light descending from above your head through your body and anchoring in the heart center. At the end of 30 days, you will have a complete foundational practice. More importantly, you will have direct experience of what these practices actually do, not as concepts, but as lived, measurable shifts in the quality of your inner life. Increased clarity, decreased reactivity, moments of genuine peace that do not depend on external circumstances. The beginning of the recognition that what you are is not produced by this world, and therefore cannot be taken by it. The full story of Gnostic Jesus is, at its deepest level, a love story, not the sentimental love of greeting cards and romantic comedies. The love that launched the Pleroma into existence, the inexhaustible, self-overflowing abundance of a divine source, so full of itself that fullness itself becomes creative. The love that moved Sophia to reach, even unwisely, even beyond the boundaries that would have kept her safe. The love that could not leave what it had created, even in its fractured, imprisoned, forgetful state, without sending something of itself to wake it up. The love that is present in the fact that the divine spark is in you. Think about what that means. The rulers of this world, the Demiurge, the Archons, the entire system of material governance tried to build a being in the image of divine light and produced a body that could not rise. They had every form of power that operates in the material realm. They had cosmic architecture and archontic authority and the full resources of the created cosmos at their disposal, and they could not give the form they built, the one thing that would make it alive. It took Sophia. It took the genuine pleromatic light. It took something that comes from beyond the system entirely, something that cannot be manufactured within the system, no matter how much material power is applied to the attempt. And that something is what is living inside you right now, not as a metaphor, nor as a beautiful spiritual concept to hold lightly and put aside when life gets busy, as the most fundamental, most real, most essential fact about what you are. The Church spent 17 centuries trying to replace this recognition with an institutional system of mediated access to external divine favor. They nearly succeeded. The Gnostic texts were burned, the teachers were killed, the communities were destroyed. For 1700 years, the sealed jars sat in the Egyptian desert, and the light inside every human being who might have been reached by what was in those jars remained unrecognized, present, patient, undefeated. Then in December 1945, in the desert near Nag Hammadi, a farmer's mattock struck something hard, a sealed jar, over a foot tall, buried in the sand. He hesitated. Local folklore said sealed jars contained jinn, but the possibility of gold won. He smashed it open. Inside were 13 leather-bound codices containing 52 texts. Most of them had been completely lost to history for 16 centuries. The secret book of John, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Sophia of Jesus Christ, the Thunder Perfect Mind. Text after text after text, each one a love letter from the consciousness that placed the divine spark inside you. Each one saying the same thing in different words, across 16 centuries of silence, across the ash of burned libraries and the blood of executed teachers, across the entire weight of institutional suppression directed at this one essential recognition. You are not what they told you were. The prison is real. The Archons are real. The system of control is real, and it is operating, and it has been remarkably effective for a very long time. But you were never of the system. You were never produced by the system, and therefore you cannot be ultimately contained by the system. The divine spark that Sophia placed in you, the pleromatic light that entered the body, the Demiurge built and caused the Archons to tremble. That spark is not dimmed by time. It is not weakened by lifetimes of forgetting. It is not diminished by the fear and shame and distraction that have been layered around it. It is here. It is present. It is what is listening to these words right now, recognizing in them not new information but the oldest knowledge, the knowledge that precedes this body and this lifetime and this particular configuration of forgetting. The Gnostics buried their texts because they trusted that someone would find them. They sealed the jars in the 4th century. The jars were opened in the 20th. 80 years later, in the 21st century, the teaching that was in those jars is reaching further than at any point since the communities that produced it were destroyed. It has found you, not by accident. The pneuma within you, Sophia's light, recognizes the teaching that frees it. You are here, in this moment, having heard this transmission, because something in you knew it was time. The question the Gnostic tradition has always asked, from the very beginning, is not whether the light is present. The light is always present. The question is only whether the consciousness surrounding it is ready to stop pretending it isn't there. Place your hand on your heart one more time. Feel that. That is the answer. That is the Pleroma pressing toward recognition through the form it has been inhabiting since before you had a name. That is Sophia's light, patient and undefeated, having waited through every moment of your forgetting for this exact moment of your remembering. The door was never locked. The prison was never ultimate. The spark was never extinguished. You were always free. You are only now beginning to know it. The teaching is complete. What happens next is entirely up to you.